Welcome to Healthy Conversations, sharing the knowledge, experience, stories, and the wisdom of herbalists and other natural healers, with your host, Stephen Horn. Today's guest, Phyllis Light. We're going to talk about Southern folk remedies that aren't like
Okay.
herbs.
Do you have some herbs in mind, or?
Well, there's Solomon seal,
Okay.
there's yellow root.
Yep, we can talk about any and all those.
Hi, and welcome again to Healthy Conversations. I have again with me today Phyllis Light, a Southern folk herbalist and a good friend, and someone that I have learned a lot from over the years. And she is going to talk with me today about some Southern folk remedies. You know, one of the things that's a real big problem we have is that in some ways, commercial herbalism has limited our access to remedies because we have all these herbs that are really popular because they're accessible and you can buy them online or the health food store or whatever. But we're missing out on a lot of really great remedies, and I know a lot of these are part of Southern folk tradition. So, Phyllis, let's talk about some of these. And for one, let's just talk about one that I think really ought to be used a whole lot more because Oregon, I mean, golden seal is extremely endangered. And
Right.
we have this other herb that contains berberine that grows in the South that's extremely plentiful called yellow root.
Yes.
So you want to talk a little bit about yellow root?
Yeah. Yellow root is Latin name is Xanthorrhiza simplicia, and it actually I have found it. I was at an herb conference in Wisconsin once and found it growing along the side of a lake. And I was like, "What?" So its range is a lot further north, I think, than some people think it might be, but it is abundant, more abundant, and with huge traditional use in the South. So it's called yellow root. Because of the berberine content, it makes the stems and the root yellow, but you don't have to dig up the root to get it. We always
Oh,
use above the ground. We use the stems. So the plant comes back every year. It's a perennial, so you don't want to dig the root up if you don't have to.
okay.
The stems are full of berberine. Full of berberine. They're as
I,
yellow as the root, right?
wow.
Yep. So yellow root is also called shrub yellow root, and it'll get 4 or 5 feet tall.
Wow.
I've gathered yellow root stems like a good 3 feet tall, and just cut them up in full of berberine. You can
Wow.
taste the berberine. So it's a very renewable plant, right?
As compared to digging up the roots of golden seal, which are
Yes.
very unsustainable.
Very unsustainable. So this is very sustainable. And it likes to be close to water, but it doesn't want its feet wet. It can handle a little flood on occasion, but then, waters recede. It needs that dryness. So here we find it growing along creek banks. So
Mhm.
my cousin Calvin, who was also one of my herbal teachers, and Calvin, he was the herbalist for men in the area. He only saw men. Occasionally, he would see women for something not related to reproductive, but 95% of his clientele were men. But he was also Native American, and his family he was part Cherokee, Apache, and English, and his ancestors had actually been on the signing of the treaty that created the Trail of Tears, much to he hated that. He was embarrassed and ashamed about that, but
Well,
that was
that was
him.
a tragic moment in
That was
American
a
history.
tragic moment. Yeah. So anyway, he told me that, when he was growing up, he learned how to identify the plants in the woods from his grandfather, who taught him the Cherokee songs of the plant, and that's how he learned. And that's also, he wasn't not a fluent Cherokee speaker, but he could give you a song for every tree in Cherokee,
Wow.
right? So he told me that Native Americans, indigenous, were really good forest farmers. We would talk about them being forest farmers now. And that when hunters went out, they would plant the seeds of yellow root along the creeks because it was like the number one antibiotic
Right.
right? And it was all you had to do is clip off a little stem a twig, and you had anti-infective activity that you could use either topically or take internally. So he said that's why there's so much yellow root in places you wouldn't expect to find it in massive amounts, because the seeds were scattered not by birds, but by the local indigenous people, which I wouldn't makes a whole lot of sense. And same thing with ginseng, the same thing with a lot of what we would consider
Yeah, I've
plants.
also heard people, South American natives did the same thing. They basically helped to promulgate plants in the wilds that they needed, you know?
That's it. And,
Yeah,
you know, they were forest farming ahead of the time.
permaculture.
Hmm. So yellow root is very high in berberine. Actually has more berberine than Oregon grape. And I know Oregon grape root is like the big herb right now for berberine, but yellow root has more berberine. Golden seal, it has, in addition to berberine, hydrasting, which kind of puts it in a separate category and
Yes.
makes it a little bit stronger in action, not because there's more berberine, but because of the effect of the hydrasting. So yellow root has as much berberine as golden seal.
Yeah.
So you can see it's very anti-infective, really good for ulcers. And so I grew up, we either made a tea out of the twigs or you just chewed on a twig. If you didn't mind bitter, you just chewed on it and swallowed it. And that's kind of how I still do mine.
Well, I used to get canker sores, and my mom would, when I was a kid
Mm,
used golden seal on them, which I absolutely hated. And then as an adult, I found out actually if you had a canker sore, golden seal didn't taste so bad.
that's
And
right.
I picked up some of these little, I guess they are the pieces of stem when I was in the South. It was in a like a little store,
Yep.
and I found I could chew on those, and it worked just as well in counteracting the canker sores. So that's one reason why I'm interested in. But it's it's not readily available because I guess it's not like
It's never made it into commerce. It
yeah
made it
never.
into commerce in the South, and it's still like the one herb that a family will know about that have forgotten all the other herbs.
Wow,
It's still generational transmission of that knowledge of
that's
how to use yellow root. I could go down to my local Foodland grocery store, and they have jugs of yellow root decoction for sale in the store.
wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
it is amazing. I mean, that's how widespread and ingrained the use of that plant is in the
Yet
culture
outside of
here.
that region, almost nobody's heard of this
Yeah.
herb, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to start with that one. Another one, I learned about this from Thomas Easley, but I'm sure that you familiar with. Maybe you introduced him to it. Solomon seal.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let me finish yellow root. I
Oh,
got one more thing I want to say about yellow root. In addition to its anti-infective activity, increases bile flow, it has an
mhm.
action on the liver, helps clear liver out, and it's a big use here to detox the liver. You use yellow root, but it was also stop smoking herb. It
Oh,
was the number one
really?
stop smoking herb. And so I still do this, and I have clients who call and ask for it, but I still recommend it. You take a twig and you kind of pretend like it's your cigarette in a way, but you cut the twigs into the length of a cigarette, and then people just kind of put it in their mouth and kind of like suck on it, and then I play around with it for two
Uh-huh.
or 3 days, and it really totally helps people release that craving for nicotine. It works really well.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
wanted to throw that in. And all right, so Solomon seal.
Yeah, Solomon seal.
So Solomon seal is, God, I can't remember the Latin name for that. Sorry. It's a really pretty, cute plant, and like yellow root needs full shade to grow. So this is
Uh-huh.
full canopy shade. It also likes little damp areas, so you might find it in little low-lying areas, the same as yellow root. But it'll grow away from the dampness also, but it just won't get as big. It
Yeah.
likes, in the perfect environment, it likes a lot of rich leaf litter on the floor, a forest floor, but they also grow it in beds, and it does quite well in beds. It makes a rhizome. It's a rhizome that we're interested in. I've dug wild ones in the woods where that root might be 3 feet long
Wow.
and like this big around. Right. Need to chop it up as soon as you get it or buy it already processed, because if it dries, you almost can't like cut it up. So it's got to be cut up fresh. It is absolutely excellent topically as an oil or a salve, and I just tend to make oils out of it for anything muscular or anything in the joints. So for example, quick story, my aunt had after she got in her 80s, she couldn't sleep at night. Her knees would hurt really, really bad.
Hmm.
There was no cartilage left in her knees. It was bone on bone. And when she laid down, she couldn't even stand for her knees to touch each other. And they would just ache. And then she would try to get out of bed first thing in the morning, and they just wouldn't work. And there was a lot of pain. So they tried. She got steroid shots in her knees. Nothing worked. So finally she called me and she said, could you make me up something for my knees? I can't sleep. I'm in pain all the time. And I went, sure. So I just made her some Solomon seal oil
Uh-huh.
in a crock pot method, took it out to her. The next day she called and I told her, you definitely put some on before you go to bed, but you can put it on anytime during the day too. You can put it on multiple times. But she called me the next day and told me that was the first time in months she had slept all night with without the pain waking her up. It is absolutely amazing. And that was just topical use. She continued to use this through her elder years, and she passed on last year. She was 89. And she kept that Solomon seal oil by the bed. Pain pills didn't work. Nothing worked. And then when her spine, she started having problems in her spine. She had degenerative spinal disease, stenosis. Her
Uh-huh.
daughter would rub the Solomon seal, the pain would be gone. And I'm not going to say it was 100% gone, but it was such a low level that she could function, you know?
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really an incredible herb for that kind of bone joint things. Now, I don't remember if I know the name of this one correctly, but isn't there kind of an adaptogen that was used for horses that became hide bound called
Crossvine.
crossvine? That was, yes.
Crossvine. Yeah. I think the Latin on that is bignonia. It has a trumpet flower, and it's a two-tone trumpet flower. So if you're out in the woods, you really have to make sure you're identifying this correctly, because the other trumpet, which is kind of solid pink red, is poison. So you don't want to get that one.
Right.
Um,
One don't get the wrong plant.
but you can tell the difference in the leaves because crossvine is an evergreen, and the leaves are make a cross from one set
Ah,
of leaves to the other, right?
oh,
And they're evergreen, so you can pick this anytime, but I think it's most active if you get it spring and summer. I think by the time the winter gets here, some activity is diminished. Crossvine it opens the lungs. It opens the
oh,
lungs in an amazing fashion. So it oxygenates the body. Now we know it contains a chemical called resperin, Resprine, which was actually a pharmaceutical drug for many years. So you can breathe better and you have more energy. So it was considered an adaptogen because it increased your energy, right?
uh-huh.
It increased oxygen to the mitochondria. So now you have more energy,
That
you're making more
sounds
energy.
great.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Send me a bottle.
Right. It was really good for cough, colds, and flus. A lot of the older folks here would take in the wintertime, would just have a cup of tea in the evening. It would help relax them, help them sleep. But it was also considered to boost the immune system and to help them ward off the colds and the coughs and, whatever was going around. It made them stronger. And it also lifts depression. Crossfine. You cannot buy this one on the marketplace. I'm not even sure. You might can find it on Etsy because there's enough Southerners on Etsy now doing Southern herbs that you might can find the tincture of it there or the dried leaves. If you get the dried leaves, they're evergreen. It's just like a leaf to a cup of hot water.
One
And just
leaf?
one leaf, maybe two.
Wow.
It does contain some cardiac glycosides, so you would never want to do a big dose of this
Right.
because it could slow.
Like you'd never want to do a big dose of lily of the valley. Just
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly. Or even wild cherry, right? Because it has cardiac glycosides in it also. So, a lower dose and it works really good. Just,
Terrific.
yeah. I sometimes recommend it for my clients with COPD,
Mhm.
either that or prickly ash.
I like prickly ash. I think prickly ash is an amazing remedy that's way underused for
Way
circulation.
underutilized. Yeah. And also, but we have, in addition to like the tree prickly ash, the southern prickly ash, we also have what we call prickly ash that's an Aurelia.
Uh,
And it's also called devil's walking stick because it's got those thorns all the way up
mm,
it, but it's more like a shrub. It gets like maybe 10, 12 feet tall. And it has berries at the top of it that look like elderberries in a way, but they're
uh-huh.
not.
Yes.
And you can tincture those berries and just do 2 or 3 drops. Really opens the lungs up. Really opens the lungs. The root is also considered a painkiller and
Mhm.
was used for pain anywhere in the body, including toothache. It would numb a bad tooth. So it's also called toothache tree.
Wonderful.
And it just grows everywhere.
Well, do you have another one that comes to mind, or
Just like a little known
yeah, a
under.
little known remedy, or if not, I how about an herb that used to be available and then got off the market, sassafras.
Totally can talk about sassafras. Also can talk about sarsaparilla, depending on the time that we have.
Yeah, it was, sarsaparilla. I think is a little more readily
More no,
available, but let's
yeah,
talk. So let's talk
true.
about sassafras.
I will talk about sassafras and I'll talk about when it came off the market and why. So, sassafras originally, when the British came, the Spanish came, sassafras almost became overharvested. It became endangered. And they shipped so much sassafras root to Europe because the root was, if anybody's ever had sassafras, hot. It's almost like cinnamon in the mouth. And it was part of root beer for years,
Yeah.
fermented for root beer. So it has that birchy flavor, but hotter. It's almost like putting cinnamon hots in your mouth if you get a
Mm.
really good root. I mean, it's that hot. So they were like, oh my God, we did find the shortcuts China and the spice trade, which is what they were looking for, trying to get to China where all the spice is. And so they started cutting down these gigantic trees and shipping the roots off to Europe. And it was the second herb in 1499 that was shipped to Europe. The first was cayenne, the second was sassafras. Well, and tobacco was in the top three too. All right, so sassafras is heating, blood moving, stimulating, slightly drying. It contains saffrol, which is an oil-based phytochemical that experimentation that was done in, I want to say the 60s, maybe
Something like
70s,
that.
something
Yeah.
like that, where they gave some poor mouse 400 times its body weight in saffrol, and it caused cancer. And so then it was like, you can't put this in products anymore. That was the FDA. Now there is like studies since then that have denounced that, especially with traditional preparation methods. And just
Right.
quickly, traditional preparation methods developed over a long period of time to get the most benefit from the herb in the
With the
safest way
least amount
possible,
of
the least amount of harm.
harm.
Yes, exactly. So the saffrol constituent is alcohol soluble and
Uh huh.
fat soluble. Traditional preparation was water. It's not water soluble. So there might be minute amount of saffrol, but you might not get any. And in addition to that, herbs tend to have built-in phytochemical constraints so that if one phytochemical is not good for you, well, it has developed a phytochemical to offset that because
Yes.
otherwise it would harm it. It would harm the plant, right?
Yeah.
So
Like lobeline and lobelia, you could take a toxic dose of that alkaloid, but you'd never take enough of that in real lobelia because you'd throw up long
that's
before you
right.
got to
It
that
has
point.
a built-in constraint, right?
Yes. Right.
So sassafras is the same way, and they had extracted the saffrol in large amounts and given to these animals that were only this
Right.
big and not in a water-soluble fashion. So the
Right.
studies since then that have looked at traditional methods have found very little safrole in a water extraction. So sassafras, in addition, was used to lower blood pressure.
Mm.
It was used to strengthen the heart. It was used to cool you off in the summertime when you were too hot. It was used to open the pores so you had a good sweat if you had a fever and to help control fever. And it was used to balance hormones as a women's hormone balancer after childbirth and at menopause. So it helped, and it was used to strengthen and cleanse the liver. So it had a very wide use, but it was not considered for chronic use, like a chronic disorder. It
Right.
was considered short-term acute medicine. And
Great.
there's also a difference to look at.
Yeah. Well, that's illustrates the importance of understanding traditional preparations, what part they used, when they harvested it, things like that, which is part of the stuff that tends to get lost as you pass things down in books and so forth. Like I remember reading in a plant guide that the Native Americans chewed yarrow to relieve toothache. And I never understood why until Matthew Wood said that there's a little purple tip on the leaves in the spring that has a topical anodyne that you can release. And that just shows you really have to get the traditional information to know
Yeah.
how to use the plant properly.
Yeah. To its best advantage. Absolutely. And we
I,
are losing that information.
we are, and it's very sad, which is why I'm very happy that people like you are out there trying to spread it. In fact, you can see everybody how knowledgeable Phyllis is, how she can just talk about these plants. And if you'd like to study with her or learn more from her, the links to her website and link to her book are found in the description below. So, reach out to her and learn more, especially if you're in the southern region. She's one of the best herbalists there is for learning about that region
Thank
of
you.
the world. So,
And my
Phyllis,
classes are online.
yeah, thank you so much, Phyllis, for being with me today. It's been really fun. I've learned a lot. So we'll have to have you on again some other time.
I
Was
would
a
really like it, and it's been really good to see you and make this reconnection.
I've enjoyed the interchange, and just it's good to talk to you again because it's been quite a while. So
Yeah.
God bless and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Bye. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to catch future episodes of Healthy Conversations. Help us educate others by sharing this video, and please feel free to share your own thoughts, comments, and questions below. To learn more, check out the links below.